Hello, my name is Laura, and at my mother-in-law's anniversary, she stood before everyone and called me the curse of this family. Imagine hearing that in front of the people who should protect you. They laughed, nodded, whispered, like I was nothing but a stain. But what if the truth they tried so hard to bury was the very thing that could shatter their lives forever? I walked into the grand ballroom with a sinking feeling in my stomach. The chandeliers sparkled like stars, their light bouncing off polished wooden floors that had seen decades of celebrations. Every guest was dressed to perfection, the women in gowns that shimmered as they moved, the men in tailored suits that seemed to declare their status without a word. I should have felt like family here. After all, it was my mother-in-law's 40th wedding anniversary. Yet, the moment my heels touched the marble, I knew I didn't belong. The air buzzed with laughter and clinking glasses, but the undertone was colder. A few relatives brushed past me without acknowledgement, their eyes gliding over me as if I were a shadow. One leaned close to another, whispering something that made them both chuckle. I caught the words, "She always looks out of place," before they moved on. My chest tightened. Being the youngest had always meant I was overlooked, but tonight felt worse, like the stage was set for my humiliation. At the far end of the hall, Morwenna stood in command. She was radiant in a floor-length gown, her jewelry carefully chosen to match the occasion. Her hands moved with authority as she directed servers, checked the floral arrangements, and adjusted the lighting to her exact preference. Everything had to be flawless because in her world, appearances were all that mattered. I knew her attention to detail wasn't just about aesthetics, it was about control, and control always came at my expense. I made my way through the crowd, past tables draped in white linen, each centerpiece taller and more extravagant than the last. My cousin intercepted me with a tight smile. "Laura, you made it," she said, her tone more obligatory than warm. "We've set your place already." Relieved for a moment, I followed her, but when we reached the edge of the hall, my relief soured. My seat wasn't at the main family table beneath the grand chandelier. Instead, it was tucked against the side wall near the waitstaff's staging area, the clatter of trays and soft instructions filling the air. I blinked, stunned, before my cousin shrugged lightly. "You don't mind, do you? The family table was, well, it's full." I forced a smile, though my throat ached. "Of course. Wouldn't want to inconvenience anyone." As I sat, I felt eyes flick toward me. Some widened in surprise, others narrowed with amusement. A couple across from me whispered before quickly averting their gaze. My chair was practically pressed against a service cart stacked with plates, and as a server rushed past, she gave me an apologetic look, as if she understood the insult I was enduring. In America, we like to believe family means equality, that everyone has a seat at the table. But here I was, literally pushed to the side, invisible in my own family's celebration. I swallowed hard, remembering Shirley Chisholm's words I once read in a book. "If they don't give you a seat at the table, bring a folding chair." That line burned into me as I sat straighter, determined not to let the shame break me. Still, the sting was sharp. The music swelled as waiters circulated with champagne flutes, glasses clinked, and conversations buzzed. Then came the chime of a spoon against crystal, Morwenna calling for attention. She stood at the head of the family table, holding her glass high. "40 years," she began, her smile wide and practiced. 40 years of building a family, enduring trials, and celebrating triumphs. Tonight is not just about my marriage, it's about the legacy we've created." The crowd responded with polite applause. My heart pounded, the rhythm quickening as I realized she wasn't just addressing the family, she was preparing the audience. Her voice softened, her eyes glistening with staged emotion. "This family has endured hardships, but we always emerge stronger. Yet there has been one burden we carry, one shadow we cannot deny." The room fell quiet. My chest tightened. Her smile vanished. She turned her head deliberately, her gaze landing on me like a spotlight. "And that shadow," she said with ice in her voice, "is the curse we've been forced to endure. She's the curse." For a moment, no one moved. Glasses hovered mid-air, forks stopped halfway to mouths. Then came the whispers. Did she just say? One voice murmured. Another nervous laugh broke the silence, then a ripple of uneasy chuckles spread across the tables. My hand shook. The champagne glass slipped from my fingers and shattered against the marble floor. The sound echoed like a gunshot, sharp and final. All eyes turned to me. Heat surged up my neck, burning my cheeks. Shame, disbelief, fury, they collided in my chest until I could barely breathe. I wanted to scream, to throw her cruelty back in her face, but my voice stuck in my throat, strangled by the weight of years of being branded as the outcast. I heard one uncle mutter, "Always bringing trouble," as if Morwena's declaration was simply confirming what he'd believed all along. Another relative leaned back, shaking his head, whispering, "Unbelievable." Inside, I repeated to myself, "This is not who I am. This is who they want me to be." Morwena raised her glass again, as if nothing had happened, her smirk sealing the wound she'd just carved. I stayed silent, my body trembling, but somewhere beneath the humiliation, a spark ignited. A voice in me whispered, "Not forever, not like this." As the laughter and whispers resumed, I sat frozen, the shards of my broken glass scattered around my feet. Each piece seemed to mirror the way they wanted me to see myself, fractured, unwanted, small. But I refused to give them that victory. I thought of every time I'd been blamed as a child when something broke or went missing, every whisper behind my back, every pointed glance when bad luck struck. Maybe every family needs a scapegoat, someone to carry the weight of fears they can't name. Tonight, I had been chosen again, but this time, I knew the truth wasn't about me, it was about them. My heart raced, anger building beneath the surface. Maybe every curse is just fear in disguise, I thought, steadying my breath. As the night pressed on, the noise of the party drowned me out, but in my silence, I found strength. I leaned closer to my untouched plate, whispered to myself words no one else could hear. If I am their curse, then one day, I'll be the curse that saves them. My gaze met Morwena's across the hall. Her eyes locked on mine, and for the first time, I didn't look away. After Morwena's cruel toast, the room had fallen into a strange rhythm, the kind where people pretended everything was back to normal, though the tension clung to the air like smoke. Conversations resumed in low voices, but I caught the way eyes darted toward me when they thought I wasn't looking. Some smiled at me with politeness that stung worse than open hostility. Others smirked, barely hiding their satisfaction at my humiliation. I stood near my small table at the side of the hall, trying to calm my shaking hands. Guests swirled around me, glasses refilled, hors d'oeuvres passed on silver trays, but it all felt like a play staged for appearances. A woman I barely knew leaned in toward her husband and whispered just loud enough for me to catch, "Well, she brought it on herself." His nod was quick, dismissive, as if I was nothing more than the punchline to an old joke. Inside, I repeated an American saying I had once heard, "Family is supposed to have your back, not put the knife there." That thought sat heavy in my chest. I kept my chin up, but the sound of forced laughter rang hollow, like glass about to crack. It didn't take long for the next blow to come. I was sipping water, trying to disappear into the corner, when a server carrying a tray of champagne slipped on the polished floor. The tray tilted, flutes clattering as liquid sprayed. In the chaos, a little boy stumbled backward, fell to the floor, and scraped his knee. His cry cut through the music, and everyone's head turned at once. Before I could even move, I felt it, the weight of their stares. Morwena's eyes narrowed, and Thalassa, always quick to seize an opportunity, pointed in my direction with a bitter smile. "Strange, isn't it?" she said, her voice sharp enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Trouble follows her everywhere." Morwena didn't hesitate. She raised her glass, her voice cold and steady. "See? This is exactly what I meant earlier. She's the curse." A ripple spread across the room. Some gasped, others exchanged knowing looks, and a few shook their heads in mock pity. No one pointed out that the waiter had slipped on the floor. No one mentioned that the boy had simply lost his balance. No, it was easier to make me the villain, easier to let the label Morwena branded me with grow roots in their minds. I stood frozen as the people around me shifted their weight, subtly stepping back as if I carried something contagious. My chair, my plate, Even the empty space around me became a symbol of isolation. Inside, I was screaming, how could they twist even this? How could an accident become my burden? But on the outside, I stayed still, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me unravel. My thoughts circled around another truth I had once read. Blame is just a lazy person's way of making sense of chaos. That phrase hit harder than ever as I stared at the people who were supposed to be my family, people who had chosen convenience over fairness. The humiliation carved deep, but under it, anger simmered. As if the night hadn't given me enough already, it grew worse. I had tried to keep my head down, to fade into the background. But fate, or maybe Morwenna's persistence, pulled me back into the spotlight. A family friend visiting from out of town, unaware of the undercurrents swirling in the room, scanned the tables and spotted me sitting alone. His voice, loud and oblivious, cut across the hall. "Oh, who's that girl sitting by herself?" The questions silenced conversations instantly. My breath caught in my throat. Morwenna didn't miss a beat. She turned her head, her voice cold enough to chill the air. "That's our curse!" Laughter broke out, sharp, jagged, and merciless. It started as a ripple, then spread like wildfire until the sound filled the hall. People I had shared meals with, holidays with, even secrets with, now laughed at me as if I were the butt of a cruel joke. I wanted to vanish, but my body rooted itself to the chair. I clenched my fists under the table, nails biting into my palms, holding myself together by sheer will. The guest's face flushed red. "I'm sorry," he stammered, turning toward me with discomfort. "I didn't mean—" Morwenna cut him off smoothly, her smile sharp. "Don't be. Everyone here knows the truth." Her words sliced through me, each one a reminder that she held the power to define me in this family, and no one dared to challenge her. Inside, I burned. Not because of her cruelty, I had grown used to that, but because strangers now joined in my shaming. It wasn't just my relatives anymore. Outsiders were being invited to see me as the family's curse, and their laughter cemented the lie. I kept my face calm, but my resolve hardened. This will not be the end of my story, I thought. I won't remain voiceless forever. As the night dragged on, I noticed small cracks forming in the wall of lies. Some of the younger relatives shifted uncomfortably in their seats, their eyes darting between me and Morwenna with uncertainty. A niece bit her lip, clearly uneasy with the cruelty being displayed. They weren't ready to speak up, but I could see it. The seeds of doubt had been planted. I leaned back, drawing in a slow breath. The louder they speak, I told myself quietly, the more I see their weakness. Another saying flickered through my mind. "Never wrestle with pigs. You both get dirty, and the pig likes it." That was my reminder. This wasn't the time to fight. Silence, for now, would be my weapon. I rose from my chair, excusing myself with as much composure as I could muster, and walked toward the hallway. My steps were steady, though my heart pounded so loudly I could hear it in my ears. Just as I reached the door, I caught Morwenna's voice behind me, low but clear enough to cut through the noise. "Mark my words, she will destroy this family." I stopped mid-step. My breath caught, my pulse spiked, and I felt a chill crawl over me. If that was what she truly believed, then tonight wasn't just about humiliation. It was about something darker, something she was determined to bury me under. The laughter hadn't really stopped. It clung to the air like smoke that refused to disperse. I tried to stand tall, but every chuckle seemed aimed at me, every whisper sharpened into a blade. I drifted toward the edge of the ballroom, thinking the shadows might give me a moment's reprieve. That's when I heard it. Two relatives leaning close, their voices low, but not low enough to escape me. "She should never have been part of this family," one said. The words slipped out like poison, familiar, cruel, and far too rehearsed. My chest tightened. I turned my head slightly and saw the way their shoulders leaned together, their glances darting toward me with disdain. The same look I had seen countless times as a child. Guests kept mingling, but the hushed conversations seemed to converge on me like a spotlight I hadn't asked for. The ache was sharp, but beneath it, something else stirred. I wasn't just hurt, I was oddly aware that their cruelty had become predictable. I whispered to myself, "Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words can scar the soul." Tonight, the scars felt fresh, but also strangely instructive. They had taught me that silence could outlast their malice. Still, the whispers dragged me backward into memories I'd tried to bury. I remembered being 8 years old, standing in the living room while shards of a broken vase lay scattered across the carpet. My older siblings pointed at me, eyes wide with mock innocence. "She did it. She's always so clumsy." I remembered trying to protest, but my voice was swallowed by theirs. My parents looked at me, disappointment already fixed in their eyes. I hadn't even touched the vase. That wasn't the only time. If a toy was missing, I had hidden it. If homework went undone, I had distracted someone. If there was a quarrel, I had sparked it. Being the youngest meant I was always the easiest to blame, the silent glue that kept the rest of them united. I saw it clearly now. Scapegoating wasn't random. It was the family's way of binding together by choosing one to carry their fractures. As I sat at the table that night, the wine glasses glinting under the chandeliers, I thought, sometimes a family doesn't break you all at once. They chip away until you believe their story about you. Grief washed over me, not just for tonight, but for the little girl I had been, forced to swallow blame until I almost forgot my own truth. Yet mixed with that grief was anger, slow and steady, like embers that refused to die. The speeches resumed. A hush fell across the room as a screen was pulled down and a projector whirred to life. I thought maybe this would shift the focus. 40 years of marriage, surely they would keep it celebratory. But the montage that began made my breath catch. Photo after photo filled the screen. Holiday gatherings, vacations, birthdays, graduations. My cousins' faces beamed, my siblings posed proudly, Morwenna stood regal in every frame, and me, I was barely there. If I was present at all, I was shoved to the edge, half cropped out, or completely erased. A cousin leaned toward another, smirking. "Funny, isn't it? She's never really been part of the story." Another chuckled. "Guess they wanted to keep the curse off the screen." The words landed harder than any slap. My heart pounded, my pulse thudding in my ears. I gripped the sides of my chair so tightly my knuckles whitened. I refused to let tears fall. If I gave them that, they would think the erasure had worked. Each frame of that video became less about memories and more about annihilation. It wasn't oversight. It was deliberate, careful editing to make me vanish. And in that choice, they had declared openly what had always been whispered, that I didn't belong, that my existence was inconvenient enough to erase. Inside my head, the words thundered. When they erase you from the pictures, it's not about the photos, it's about erasing your claim to belong. My breathing slowed, not from calm, but from control. I would not give them the breakdown they wanted. They could strip me from their stories, but they couldn't take away the truth of what I'd endured. I scanned the room and noticed the discomfort on a few younger relatives' faces. They shifted in their seats, avoided eye contact, whispered uneasily. It was subtle, but I caught it. The awareness that what was happening wasn't right. That flicker of discomfort was a small kind of witness, and I clung to it. I told myself, they can cut me out of their pictures, but not out of the truth. The video droned on, each omission heavier than the last. My mind steadied, my jaw tightened, and I sat straighter. The act of staying put, of refusing to bolt from the room, became its own rebellion. If their goal was to erase me, then my silent presence was resistance. When the final image faded and the lights brightened, Morwenna clapped, her face glowing with satisfaction. To her, it was flawless, a curated history without the blemish of my existence. Guests applauded politely, some smiling, others unsure. I leaned closer to my plate, whispered under my breath, "If they think they can erase me, they've underestimated me." And then, for the first time that night, I didn't feel like the one being crushed under their story. I felt like the one about to rewrite it. I needed air. The ballroom, with its chandeliers and endless chatter, felt like a cage closing in on me. My pulse was still quick from watching that carefully edited video where I had been erased, and the laughter that followed still echoed in my head. I slipped away, past a line of servers carrying more champagne, and pushed through a side door into the corridor. The difference hit me immediately. Outside the hall, the quiet wrapped around me like a blanket. The muffled thrum of music and voices became background noise, leaving me with the sound of my own breathing and the faint hum of the hotel's ventilation system. I leaned against the cool wall, eyes closed, drawing in a steadying breath. Over the years, I had learned to remove myself instead of exploding, to step away before they could claim my reaction as proof of their lies. "Silence isn't empty," I murmured softly to myself, recalling a phrase I had once read. "It's full of answers." I pressed my palms together, willing my hands to stop trembling. If there was one thing I had learned in this family, it was that my composure had to be sharper than their cruelty. As I walked further down the corridor, my heels echoing lightly on the carpet, a thin line of light caught my eye. A door stood ajar, just a sliver, but enough to let voices escape. I slowed my steps, curiosity overcoming caution. The voices were familiar. "I'm telling you, she can never know," the lass's voice hissed. "If she finds out, the rest of them will start asking questions." I froze. My heart kicked up, thudding painfully against my ribs. Morwenna's reply was lower but firm, every syllable laced with disdain. "It's easier this way. They've always believed she's the problem. Let them keep thinking it. She's been the curse before, and she still is." I clutched the side of the wall, the truth sliding into place with brutal clarity. This wasn't just petty cruelty, it was calculated. She wasn't just humiliating me because she could. She was hiding something. Something serious enough that painting me as the family's scapegoat was easier than facing questions. The crack of light from that door glowed like a metaphor. Truth wasn't gone. It was just buried behind walls, waiting for someone to push it open. They don't fear curses, I thought, pulse steadying as the anger sharpened into resolve. They fear the truth. I backed away quietly before they could sense me, each step deliberate, my mind already racing. Later that night, when most of the guests were distracted by dancing and dessert, I tried to salvage some sense of dignity. I approached Morwenna and her husband with a gift I had prepared days earlier. A framed old family photo, carefully restored from a faded print I had found. I thought maybe it would remind her that despite everything, I still cared enough to preserve our history. I held it out with both hands, forcing a small smile. "I wanted you to have this. It's from the early years, before everything got so complicated." Morwenna's eyes flicked to the frame, then back to me. Her mouth curved into a thin smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Bad luck gifts don't belong here." Her words were loud enough to catch the attention of those nearby. The sting cut deep, but worse was the ripple through the crowd. A guest whispered, "That was harsh," while Thalassa smirked openly. "She should have known better," she muttered, voice dripping with satisfaction. I kept my jaw tight, my smile frozen in place, though my insides churned. I refused to let them see me flinch. Inside, I thought, sometimes rejection says more about them than it ever could about you. I turned and placed the frame gently on a side table, even as laughter hummed around me. My silence, once again, became my shield. I stood a moment longer, scanning the room. Some of the younger relatives avoided my eyes, their faces tinged with shame. Seeds of doubt were spreading in their expressions. They were beginning to see the cruelty for what it was. I repeated another line I had once read. "The truth is like a lion. You don't have to defend it. Let it loose. It will defend itself." If I wanted to break free from their lies, I would need more than hurt feelings or whispered protests. I would need proof, concrete, undeniable proof. As the night wound down and the music softened, I walked toward the exit, my heels steady on the floor. I glanced back once at the corridor where I had overheard them plotting, the closed door now silent and dark. "If they're hiding something," I whispered to myself, "I'll find it." And in that moment, my humiliation turned into resolve. The humiliation from the rejected gift still clung to me like smoke in my lungs. I wandered away from the ballroom again, needing distance from the polite laughter and the way people's eyes followed me like I was something they couldn't wait to discard. My feet carried me into a quieter part of the hotel, past gilded mirrors and the muffled sound of music behind closed doors. I told myself I only wanted a few moments to breathe, but deep down, I knew my curiosity was hunting for something more. In the private lounge near the ballroom, a folder sat on a side table, as if forgotten by someone too distracted by the evening's chaos. I hesitated, then reached for it, convincing myself it was just a glance. But when I opened the cover, my stomach turned. Inside were medical records. Morwena's name was on every page. I scanned test results that looked dire, treatments scheduled in strict intervals, a disease creeping forward silently. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear my own thoughts. This was it. The thing they'd been whispering about in that half-lit room. My breath caught as I traced the dates. She wasn't just aging, she was sick. And rather than face questions, she had chosen to use me as the explanation for everything unraveling. Secrets don't stay buried forever, I whispered to myself. They always find a way to surface. I was about to slip the folder back onto the table when I heard footsteps behind me. Caught red-handed, I turned. Thalassa stood in the doorway, her voice already raised, rehearsed fury dripping from every word. What are you doing with my mother's files? Snooping? Trying to sabotage her on her anniversary night? Before I could even form words, Morwena appeared, her face cold, eyes sharp enough to slice through me. Her voice carried over the low murmur of nearby guests beginning to gather. See? I told you all. She's desperate to tear this family apart. Thalassa stepped forward, her finger jabbing toward me. You always bring bad luck, Laura. And now this? You're prying into things that don't concern you. The papers slipped from my hands and scattered across the floor. To them, it looked like proof of guilt. Gasps spread from the doorway as onlookers leaned in, whispering like I was a thief caught stealing jewels. No, I tried to explain, my voice too thin against the roar of their accusations. But Morwena cut me off with a sharp shake of her head. Enough! Every time you're near us, chaos follows. And now you stoop this low? Have you no shame? Their voices overlapped, rising and echoing. I bent to gather the papers, my hands trembling, but the damage was done. People's eyes bore into me with pity, others with judgment, all of them ready to believe the story spun for them. Inside, I felt a wave of fear, but behind it surged anger. Anger that even this truth, her sickness, was being turned into another weapon against me. They weren't protecting her privacy. They were protecting their narrative, painting me as the curse, the intruder, the one unworthy of belonging. I stood, clutching the scattered pages, my face hot with humiliation, but I didn't cry. I refused. The night pressed forward, and after the confrontation dissolved into hushed murmurs, I slipped back into the crowd, my steps heavy, my jaw clenched. That's when another blow came, not with fury this time, but with sweetness. One of my cousins, someone who had mostly stayed out of the chaos, approached me gently. She offered a tissue, her expression soft. Don't let them get to you, Laura, she said, her voice soothing. You don't deserve this. You've been through enough tonight. Her words sank into me like balm, and for a moment I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe someone saw the truth. I took the tissue, nodding silently, my throat too tight for words, but minutes later, as I passed near the back of the hall, I caught her voice again, this time to a small group huddled by the dessert table. Her tone had shifted, sly and sharp. She's losing it. Did you see her? Hands shaking like she's guilty? She really is a curse. The tissue in my hand felt like fire. Emotional whiplash nearly knocked the air out of me. Direct insults hurt, but this two-faced cruelty was worse. Inside, my thoughts burned. A knife to the chest hurts, but a knife to the back? That's unforgettable. I steadied myself against a chair, my fingers trembling, but I breathed slowly until the shaking eased. They wanted me broken. They wanted me to fold under the weight of their lies. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Bitterness sat heavy in my chest, but underneath it, resilience began to take root. Every betrayal carved me sharper, not weaker. I walked away from the tables, the conversations, the accusing glances. Words swirled around me like smoke, but I knew better now. Arguing back would only feed their narrative, give them fresh stories to twist. Instead, I told myself the truth. I needed a strategy, not rage. Don't raise your voice, I remembered reading once. Improve your argument. Desmond Tutu's words slid into place like armor. That would be my path. Not screaming in the middle of their staged theater, but building something undeniable, something they couldn't laugh away or edit out of a photo. As I moved toward the exit, I glanced back one last time. Morwenna was laughing with her guests, as though nothing had happened. Her smile was flawless, her cruelty hidden beneath layers of charm. You hide behind lies tonight, I whispered to myself. But tomorrow, the truth will find you. When most of the guests had left and the ballroom was nearly empty, Morwenna's voice cut through the din. Family only, please. We have matters to discuss. Her tone wasn't a suggestion, it was a command. Chairs scraped, glasses were abandoned, and those not bound by blood quietly excused themselves. I felt the pull of obligation, though every nerve in me screamed to walk out the front doors of the hotel and never look back. Still, I followed the others into a smaller room, lined with dark wood panels and a long mahogany table that stretched beneath dim lights. The air was heavy, the kind of stillness that presses down on your shoulders and makes it hard to breathe. Morwenna sat at the head of the table like a queen about to pronounce judgment. Thalassa was by her side, eyes glinting with triumph. The rest of the family settled in around us, faces tight with expectation. I knew this wasn't a meeting about celebration. Families don't gather after midnight to reminisce about love. They gather to decide who belongs and who doesn't. I slid into a chair near the far end, every muscle taut with dread. My heart thudded as I braced myself. Morwenna folded her hands, her rings catching the low light. We must speak plainly tonight. Legacy is too important to leave to chance. A stack of papers sat beside her. She lifted them with deliberate calm, the sound of crisp paper slicing through the silence. One by one, she passed them down the table. Photocopies. I took mine with reluctance. It was her will. At first, I skimmed with numb disinterest. Legal jargon, lists of assets, the distribution of jewelry, property, shares. Then my eyes locked on the black line. My name. Struck through. Cold spread through my veins. I stared at it, my throat tightening, unable to look away from that single deliberate stroke of ink. Morwenna's voice floated across the table, calm, commanding. This family's legacy must be protected from bad luck. That means you, Laura, will have no claim here. The words dropped like stones into water, rippling outward. A cousin gasped softly. Another smirked, leaning back with satisfaction, as if my exclusion was overdue. I couldn't move. My fingers gripped the paper, crinkling its edge. Betrayal burned hotter than fire, not because of the money. I had never cared about the inheritance, but because of what it symbolized. This wasn't about wealth. This was about being erased formally, publicly, from the fabric of family itself. I remembered a line I had once underlined in a book. Inheritance is not about money, it's about belonging. Tonight, she had taken even that from me. I raised my eyes, meeting Morwenna's gaze. She looked back with satisfaction, as though crossing me out had cleansed her legacy. My lips pressed together, holding back the words that fought to spill out. The air thickened until it was hard to swallow. My heart beat steady, anger simmering beneath my calm exterior. And then, as if to punctuate the cruelty, Vera leaned forward, her voice dripping with venom. She doesn't even belong at this table. A few chuckles broke out. Others shifted uncomfortably, glancing down at their papers, but no one challenged her. Morwenna didn't stop it. She allowed it. Her silence was permission. I sat rigid. My first instinct was to stand, to leave, to slam the door behind me and never give them another second of my life. But I didn't move. I stayed seated, gripping the edge of the table until my knuckles turned white. Vera smirked, emboldened. Do you see how she clings on? Like a curse. Inside, my thoughts sharpened. A curse doesn't cling. It lingers until it breaks you, or saves you. The words remained unspoken, but their power fueled me. The laughter faded into uneasy silence, the kind that follows a wound cut too deep. I let it hang there, my refusal to budge turning into defiance. They wanted me gone. They wanted my absence to prove their story true. My presence was my protest. I looked around the table and caught flickers of discomfort. Some of the younger relatives wouldn't meet my eyes, shame etched in their posture. Seeds were sprouting in their silence, seeds that Morwenna couldn't control. I sat back slowly, letting the quiet wrap around me like armor. If they thought erasing me from a page erased me from the truth, they were mistaken. Sometimes silence is the loudest protest, I reminded myself. My father used to say it when words failed him in arguments with Morwenna. Tonight, I felt its weight in my bones. When the meeting dissolved, chairs scraping and murmurs filling the room, I stayed until the last voices faded. As I rose, Morwenna leaned toward Thalassa, her voice low but intentionally audible. By tomorrow, she won't dare show her face again. I paused, turning just enough so she could see my eyes narrow. She wanted me gone, diminished, erased. But I wasn't leaving. Not yet. The fight was only beginning. The meeting had ended, but its poison lingered in the air. As I sat in the smaller hotel room where the will had been revealed, the tension pressed down heavier than the oak panels surrounding us. The words of Morwenna declaring my removal from the family legacy replayed in my head like an unwanted echo. No matter how hard I tried to breathe through it, the sound of her voice clung to me. Around me, the cousins and siblings whispered to each other. Some avoided my eyes entirely, unwilling to be caught in my humiliation, while others glanced at me with smirks, as if enjoying my downfall. I had known pettiness before, but tonight it carried a different weight. They no longer felt like relatives sharing history with me. They felt like adversaries bound together against a common target. Me. I thought of an old American saying, one I had heard from a friend years ago. Sometimes the blood that's supposed to protect you is the knife that cuts the deepest. Never had it felt more true. The people who should have been my shield had become the architects of my shame. I sat with my hands folded, still, though inside my chest, despair twisted itself around a rising coil of anger. Every smile at my expense sharpened my resolve. I rose slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. I couldn't sit there another second. My voice was calm, almost too calm as I said, "I think I've had enough for tonight." The words had barely left my mouth before Morwenna's sharp voice filled the room. "Leaving already?" She stood slightly, making sure every eye turned toward me. Bad luck never stays long, does it? Laughter erupted, harsh, echoing, relentless. The sound rolled over me like a wave meant to sweep me under. Thalassa chimed in with venom dripping from her smile. "She can't handle the truth. That's why she runs." A cousin muttered from the far side of the table, loud enough to carry. "Better for everyone if she just goes." I felt their words batter against me, each one a lash meant to drive me out in disgrace. Yet I straightened my shoulders. If I left, it would not be with my head bowed. The marble floor beneath me caught the sound of my heels, each step steady, deliberate. The laughter chased me down the hall, cruel and triumphant, but I let it trail behind me. They thought I was fleeing. They didn't realize I was choosing silence as defiance. Each click of my shoes became a symbol, walking away, but not defeated. My silence carried more strength than any rebuttal I could give them in that poisoned room. I had almost reached the corridor when I felt a tug on my sleeve. I turned, startled, and saw a pair of wide, innocent eyes staring up at me. It was my young niece, no more than 8 years old, her face open and unguarded. "Aunt Laura," she asked softly, "are you really the curse Grandma says you are?" The question pierced me deeper than all the mocking laughter. Children's words had no malice, only honesty, and honesty revealed just how far the poison had spread. I crouched to her level, forcing my voice gentle, though my heart cracked inside. "No, sweetheart, I'm not a curse. Sometimes grown-ups tell stories when they're afraid." Her small brow furrowed. But everyone laughed. So it must be true? My chest ached. How do you fight lies when they've been sewn into the ears of the innocent? I brushed a strand of hair from her face and spoke with as much certainty as I could. Just because people laugh doesn't make something true. Sometimes people laugh to cover their fear. Remember that. She nodded slowly, still confused, but she slipped her hand into mine for just a moment before letting go. As she ran back toward the others, I stood, the ache heavier than before. It was one thing to be humiliated by adults who should know better. It was another to see the next generation being trained to believe their cruelty. I thought to myself, what you allow is what will continue. If I stayed silent forever, their story would swallow mine, and the children would inherit that lie. I steadied my breathing, drawing strength from the quiet of the hallway. The heartbreak hardened into something else, quiet strength that no amount of laughter could diminish. I pushed open the doors and stepped into the cold night air. The sting of their words still weighed on me, but the chill carried clarity. My fight wasn't just for me anymore. It was for the truth that deserved to live past their lies, for the children who deserved to know better than the cruelty they were being taught. I made a vow to myself as the night air wrapped around me. If they insist on calling me the curse, I will become the truth that breaks their lies. I turned back briefly, looking at the glowing hotel windows behind me, faint laughter spilling out into the dark. They could laugh tonight. Let them. Tomorrow would be different. Let them laugh tonight, I whispered into the night. Tomorrow, the reckoning begins. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, the images replayed. My name struck from the will, their laughter filling the room, Morwenna's voice branding me the family curse. The humiliation churned, but beneath it, a quiet clarity had begun to form. They thought silence meant surrender, but silence had been my shield, my preparation. At dawn, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the small necklace I had worn the night before. Inside it, the hidden recording device blinked a faint light. I plugged it into my laptop and listened. Morwenna's voice was crisp, clear. It's easier this way. They've always believed she's the problem. And Thalassa's reply, she can never know, or the family will start asking questions. I replayed it twice, my hands steady now. Silence doesn't mean weakness, it means preparation. I copied the files to a small USB drive and tucked it into my purse. That little piece of plastic had become my weapon of truth. By the afternoon, I was standing in the family estate's meeting room, a space even more intimidating than the hotel. The long table gleamed, and the chairs filled with relatives, faces drawn tight with expectation. Morwenna sat at the head, her posture regal, Thalassa flanking her like a guard. The air buzzed with unease. Morwenna wasted no time. This family must protect its dignity, and once again, Laura has brought nothing but shame. Her gaze cut to me, daring me to rise to the bait. I didn't. I kept my voice even. Are you done? A murmur ran through the room. Some of my cousins smirked, siding with Morwenna. Others looked uneasy, shifting in their seats. The truth may hurt for a little while, I said, drawing breath. But a lie hurts forever. The silence that followed was heavier than any shout. Then I reached into my purse, pulled out the USB, and placed it squarely in the center of the table. You've told your story long enough. Now it's my turn. I plugged it into the laptop connected to the projector. A few clicks, and the recording filled the room. Morwenna's voice played first. It's easier this way. They've always believed she's the problem. Thalassa's response followed. She can never know, or the family will start asking questions. The effect was instant. Gasps echoed. Some relatives froze with their mouths open. Others exchanged alarmed looks. The smug expressions drained from faces that had laughed at me just hours ago. Morwenna's hand trembled against the table, her composure cracking for the first time. If I am the curse, I asked, my voice sharp but calm, why are you so afraid of the truth? Thalassa stuttered, searching for a defense. This is taken out of context. No, I cut in. This is context, the context of your lies. The room erupted into whispers, then quieted just as quickly. My family leaned forward, every eye fixed on me. For once, they weren't laughing. They were listening. I didn't need to shout. Their own voices had condemned them. I didn't need to shout. Their lies shouted louder than I ever could. As I gathered the papers and prepared to leave, a voice rose from the far end of the table. Arkell, the retired lawyer, and one of the few I had always respected, stood. His gray hair caught the light, and his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen too much and kept too many secrets. "I need to say something," he declared. All eyes turned to him. He pointed at Morwenna, his face grave. "I was there, years ago, when she collapsed in the garden. Everyone else panicked. Laura was the one who called for help, who kept her breathing until the ambulance came. She saved her life. I saw it with my own eyes." A hush fell over the room. Arkell's voice broke slightly as he added, "And this is how you repay her, by branding her a curse. Shame on you, Morwenna." Gasps spread across the room again, sharper this time. The truth had cracked open the facade they had built. Shame rippled across the family like a wave. Those who had smirked now looked away. The younger ones shifted with discomfort, realizing the lies they had swallowed so easily. I gathered my things calmly, every movement deliberate. For once, I wasn't trembling. I wasn't the girl cornered in whispers or erased from photographs. I stood tall and looked directly at Morwenna. "You wanted me erased," I said softly, each word a blade of its own. "Instead, you erased your own truth." I turned toward the door, leaving the stunned silence behind me. Around the table, nervous glances darted between relatives, none daring to speak. The reckoning had only just begun. Morning came heavy and gray, the Portland sky leaking rain, as if to echo the unrest in my chest. I had barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard their gasps when the recording played, saw Morwenna's trembling hand, felt the silence when Arkell stood and exposed the truth. The confrontation replayed in loops, refusing to loosen its grip on me. When I finally reached for my phone, I expected a flood of calls, or at least a barrage of messages. But the screen was blank. Not one notification. The silence was deafening. I stared at the emptiness, my reflection faint in the glass, and thought, sometimes silence after a storm isn't peace. It's the eye of the hurricane. The quiet wasn't safety. It was a pause, a dangerous, heavy pause. And in that pause, I knew the fallout had only just begun. By mid-morning, a knock rattled my apartment door. I opened it to find Dr. Caledonia, her face composed, but her eyes carrying a weight I recognized. She stepped inside, brushing off her umbrella, and motioned toward my small kitchen table. "I should have come sooner," she said, lowering herself into the chair. "But I needed to choose the right moment." I sat across from her, heart pounding again. "You know they're going to twist everything. Whatever you say will be just another excuse to them." She laid a folder on the table, the same kind I had stumbled across in the hotel lounge. Her voice was low but steady. "Laura, the real curse isn't you. It's untreated sickness and denial." The words sank into me like lead. She opened the file, revealing test results, charts, notes scribbled in her hand. The truth spread out between us in black and white. "I respected confidentiality," she continued, "but the lies have gone too far. They've weaponized what should have been private pain. Instead of letting family come together, they used you as the scapegoat." I traced the pages with my fingers, swallowing hard. "They chose to hide it, to pin it all on me. That's not illness, that's cruelty." She nodded, her expression sad. "I can't undo the damage they've done, but you needed to hear it from me, not from their twisted version." The files lay stark on my table, medical evidence as undeniable as the rain streaking down the window. I thought of how illness, something that should have united us in compassion, had instead become a sword pointed at my chest. They weren't afraid of disease, they were afraid of exposure. The heaviness pressed into me, but at the same time, there was vindication. My suspicions had been right. The truth wasn't a ghost I had imagined. It was alive, documented, undeniable. Later that afternoon, as the storm outside deepened, another memory pulled me backward. A different time, years ago, when Morwenna had faced a crisis. The bills had stacked high, threatening her stability. I remembered the panic in her eyes, the desperation in her voice when she spoke of the cost. Quietly, without telling anyone, I had written the check. My hands had trembled as I signed it, not because I doubted the decision, but because I knew she'd never acknowledge it. I told myself at the time that family meant helping without needing credit, that love didn't always come with applause. Now, sitting in my small apartment with the receipts tucked in a folder I'd kept for years, I realized she had done worse than ignore it. She had erased it. It wasn't money I wanted back, I whispered to myself. It was acknowledgement, a thank you. But instead, I was erased. I pulled out the yellowed slip from the envelope, the bank stamp still faintly visible. It felt like holding proof of my own forgotten love, a silent witness to the truth of who I had been, not who they claimed I was. Bitterness crept through me, sharp and raw. To give and then be vilified. That wound cut deeper than all the public humiliations combined. As evening fell, the fallout began to ripple beyond the walls of my apartment. My phone finally buzzed, not with apologies, but with murmurs. A cousin's voice on the line, hushed. "Laura, maybe you were right all along." Another message pinged from a younger relative. "We see it now. We just can't say it yet." Others, I heard through the grapevine, were already defensive, spinning the confrontation as a manipulation on my part. And many stayed silent, too afraid to pick sides. I sat back, listening to the fragments and whispers filtering through, and thought, the truth doesn't always set you free. Sometimes it just sets everything on fire. I walked to the window, the city streets below slick with rain, headlights reflecting off puddles. Clutching the old receipts in my hand, I let the weight of it all settle inside me. "If they won't remember what I gave," I said aloud, steady, certain, "I'll make them remember what they tried to take." The storm outside raged on, a mirror of the one inside my chest. The envelope came the next morning, hand-delivered by one of Morwenna's confidants. It was written in her elegant, unforgiving script. A gathering at the estate. Family reconciliation. The words tasted bitter the moment I read them. I didn't need to open the card to know it wasn't reconciliation. It was strategy. I stared at it in the silence of my apartment, the rain from Portland's relentless skies streaking the window pane. Reflection came fast and sharp. The guilty don't invite you back to make peace. They invite you back to bury the truth. When I arrived, the estate had been staged as though for a courtroom. The grand hall was reset, tables pushed back to make room for rows of chairs. Relatives filled them, their chatter hushed, eyes flicking to me as I walked in. Morwenna sat at the head of the room, draped in confidence like armor, Thalassa just behind her. The air was thick with ceremony, and I could feel the weight of judgment waiting to be handed down. I slid into a chair, my pulse steady, but my body tense. I knew this wasn't about healing wounds. It was about tightening the noose. Morwenna rose, lifting her chin. "Once again," she began, her voice strong, "this family must face the disgrace brought upon us by Laura." Her gaze cut straight through me. Her lies, her behavior, they've stained our name. Tonight, we reclaim our dignity. A ripple moved through the crowd, nods, murmurs, a cousin whispering agreement. I braced myself. And then, from the far side of the room, a new voice broke the rhythm. Dr. Caledonia stood. She had been quiet in every gathering until now, sitting politely in the corner like a guest out of obligation. This time, she held the room in her hands. "The only curse in this family," she declared, her voice ringing against the vaulted ceiling, "is untreated illness, and the lies built to hide it." The words struck like a gavel slamming down in court. Gasps rippled through the relatives. Murmurs grew into frantic whispers. All eyes snapped toward Morwenna. Her face drained of color. I sat still, my chest tightening with a mix of vindication and grief. Vindication that the truth was finally spoken aloud. Grief that it had come to this. Cousins leaned into each other. One whispered, "She was right all along." Another's voice broke with shame. "We laughed at her, and she carried the truth." The symbolism wasn't lost on me. The doctor's words weren't just revelation, they were judgment. They rang in the air like the verdict of a trial. And in that moment, the room wasn't Morwenna's to control anymore. But she wasn't going to yield without a fight. She pushed to her feet, trembling, but still clutching authority. "Lies," she spat. She manipulated everyone. She planted this story, twisted it, made herself the victim. Her hand shot out toward me. "This is her doing." Dr. Caledonia's reply was calm, deliberate. She opened her own folder and slid papers across the table. Medical records, test results, treatment notes, evidence. No, she said, voice low but undeniable. I was your physician. You can lie to your family, but you cannot lie to medicine. The silence that followed was suffocating. Chairs creaked as relatives leaned back, faces shifting from suspicion to shame. Morwena's hands shook where they gripped the table's edge, her authority, her image, her control, all slipping piece by piece. I looked at her and thought, this isn't victory, this is exposure. And exposure can break even the strongest facade. The room stayed still until one by one, heads turned away from her. Disgust, pity, regret, all painted across familiar faces. Some moved toward me tentatively as the gathering broke apart. An aunt touched my arm, whispering, I'm so sorry, Laura. We should have listened. Another cousin avoided my eyes altogether, ashamed but unwilling to voice it. The younger relatives, those who had always seemed uneasy with the cruelty, finally spoke. One said quietly, You never deserved any of this. We see that now. I remained calm, my voice steady. I don't need apologies, I said simply. I only ever needed the truth. Inside, I reflected, forgiveness is optional. Truth is not. As the crowd thinned, I caught sight of Morwena. She sat alone now, her hands folded tightly in her lap, eyes hollow, the queen without her crown, the matriarch stripped of her mask. I lingered just long enough to whisper to myself, lies always cost more than truth, and her debt has just come due. The estate had fallen quiet since the confrontation, but inside me, the storm had not. Days passed, and I found myself back in my apartment, staring at the walls as though they held answers. Outside, neighbors carried on with their ordinary lives, walking dogs, checking mail, chatting over coffee. Their rhythm contrasted painfully with my own. My life had been turned upside down, yet the world spun on without pause. I sat at my kitchen table, the morning light pale and unkind. The coffee in my mug had gone cold, untouched. My thoughts replayed the confrontation, every word from the doctor, every gasp from my relatives. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like rubble scattered across a battlefield. Sometimes the end of a battle doesn't feel like victory, it feels like rubble. That sentence circled in my head. I acknowledged the damage, bonds frayed, trust shattered, illusions destroyed. But alongside the grief was something else. Freedom. I was no longer bound by their lies. My worth no longer hinged on their approval. Still, the scars of being erased ran deep. A few days later, I was invited by Arkell to a small gathering at his home. He said it was important, and I trusted his sincerity. When I arrived, a few younger relatives sat nervously on the couches, their eyes darting between me and the floor. Arkell cleared his throat, his voice deliberate. There's something they've all forgotten, he said, looking straight at me, but I haven't. The room fell still. He recounted the day years ago when Morwena collapsed in the garden. Everyone else had panicked, but I had stayed calm. I had called for help, carried her to the car, and made sure she kept breathing until the ambulance arrived. She wasn't a curse, Arkell said firmly. She was the one who saved her life when no one else was around. I swallowed hard, the memory rising like smoke. I remembered the terror in that moment, the weight of her body in my arms, the desperate prayers I whispered as we sped to the hospital. One of the younger cousins, voice barely above a whisper, asked, Then why did they erase her? The question hung heavy in the air. No one answered, because there was no answer that could excuse it. Inside, I felt bittersweet validation. After years of humiliation, to be recognized for a moment of love and sacrifice should have healed me. But it was too late to undo the scars. That act, my act, became my legacy, not the false curse they had painted me as, but the quiet truth that even they could no longer deny. As I walked home that night, the weight of recognition sat uneasily on my shoulders. It was real, but it was incomplete. Recognition is not the same as reconciliation. That thought anchored me. I realized I no longer needed apologies from Morwena or Thalassa. They were incapable of giving me what I truly needed. And even if they tried, it would never erase the years of betrayal. I began packing away old photos the next day. I opened a box of albums and leafed through the pages. Birthdays, holidays, gatherings where I was shoved to the corner or cut out entirely. One by one, I slid them back into the box, sealing them away. But not all of them. A few pictures I kept, ones where my smile was genuine, moments where I knew my laughter had been real, even if they tried to erase it later. As I tucked the rest into storage, I thought, sometimes you have to accept the apology you'll never get. The act of sealing those photos was deliberate. It wasn't forgetting. It was choosing what deserved space in my future. That evening, I walked through Portland's streets, watching families gather at food carts, couples strolling under umbrellas, children chasing each other through puddles. For the first time in a long while, I felt the tug of belonging. Not to them, but to life itself. Family isn't always who shares your blood, it's who shares your truth. I breathed deeply, letting the rain mist against my face. I wasn't chained to their story anymore. I could imagine a future unbound by their cruelty. When I returned home, I stood before the mirror in my bedroom. For years, I had stared into it and seen what they told me I was: a curse, an outsider, a stain. Tonight, I saw something else. I whispered, steady and strong. I am not their curse. I am my own salvation. The summons came once more, but this time I felt no dread. I walked up the familiar stone steps of the estate, not as their scapegoat, not as the curse, but as a woman in control of her own story. The rain had cleared overnight, leaving the Portland air crisp and sharp. My reflection in the glass doors looked different, steady, unflinching. When you walk into the same room differently, the room changes with you. And I did. The relatives were already seated, hushed, nervous, their chatter clipped by fear of what might unfold. The silence was heavy, the kind that swells with judgment and shame. As I entered, their eyes followed me, but instead of mockery, I saw wariness. They were waiting for something. I moved with calm steps, my heels tapping the polished floor, each sound a quiet declaration of authority. I took my seat at the table, folded my hands, and simply looked around the room. Morwenna sat at the head, pale, her once commanding presence reduced to shadows of control. The quiet anticipation was mine to command. No one spoke first. The room held its breath. A cousin finally whispered, "What do we even say to her?" Thalassa tried to rise, lips parting, but the words caught in her throat. Whatever accusations she'd prepared fell silent. "You don't need to say anything," I told them evenly. "Your silence tells me everything." And it did. The silence was the loudest verdict, heavier than all their laughter had ever been. It spoke of guilt, of exposure, of authority lost. One by one, I caught glimmers of recognition. Younger relatives, the ones who had always shifted uneasily, finally looked me in the eye. A niece gave the faintest nod, a small act of respect, but one that carried weight. In that stillness, I saw the scales shift. The family froze, not because I demanded it, but because truth had already done the work. I let the silence sit, then stood slowly. "Maybe I was the curse," I said, my voice calm, resonant. "But I became the curse that saved you." Gasps broke the stillness. Not one of them dared reply. I gathered my things deliberately, rising from the table with composure that no one could strip away. My steps toward the door were steady, measured. Behind me, no one moved, no one spoke. Their silence was the only response they could muster. Walking away isn't weakness, it's strength refusing to be wasted. I left them there, stunned, powerless, trapped in the truth they had spent years burying. Back in my apartment, the quiet felt different, no longer suffocating but liberating. I pulled out the old photos, the receipts, the files. For the first time, I didn't cry. I placed them in a box, slid it onto a shelf, not as wounds, but as pieces of a story I no longer needed to carry on my shoulders. I opened the window, letting the cool air fill the room. Fresh air, fresh beginnings. Sometimes you win not by staying, but by walking away. That thought anchored me as I stepped outside, Portland's streets alive with ordinary life. Families strolled with children, vendors handed out coffee, the city pulsed with stories larger than mine. And for the first time, I felt part of that rhythm, not erased, not cursed, but alive and free. That evening, I stood before the mirror. I studied my reflection, searching for traces of the woman they had tried to paint me as. She wasn't there. Instead, I saw someone who had walked through fire and chosen not to be ash. They called me a curse, I whispered, steady and sure. But curses fade. What remains is truth, and truth never dies. I left not broken, but free. And then I walked out into the night, blending with the crowd, finally at peace,